Hey everyone, it's a couple days after I filmed my last video, and some of the seedlings are definitely getting too large, too big for their britches. So I thought we could go through the process of splitting seeds apart gently, carefully, and kind of what that process involves, and post-care after you're done to make sure your seedlings don't, wither and die. So as you can see, they're getting quite big, quite crowded. Normally you want to separate seedlings, after they get their first set of true leaves, the leaves they get after their seed leaves. So on these sunflowers, this little kind of round half circle leaf is a cotyledon, a seed leaf that the plant had already formed before it even germinated. And then these longer, kind of slightly serrated leaves are the true leaves, what the leaves look like as the plant moves forward with growth. So on the salvia, you can see I've been a little late to the game. They have seed leaves that kind of look like these little half circles again. And then they get these pubescent serrated leaves as true leaves. But you can see they're already getting their second set of true leaves. So they're a little bigger than you ideally want to do this process for, especially because as they get to be this size, they start to have a more developed root system, which means there's more to untangle and parse apart and more roots that you can damage. So you have to be a little more careful as they get bigger. And some seedlings, you just really can't do it for. Some of them are too fragile and you really just have to let them go and pinch out the ones that you don't want. But salvia should take to the process pretty well. So let's take them to our little planting bench and see what we can do. So we're at the potting bench, have our seedlings. There's about between 3 to 6 per cell, which is a little more than you want. Ironically, this back one ended up with only one, so we won't have to end up splitting that one apart. Some things you want to have ready are a moistened towel that you can put the seedlings on as you remove the soil and cover them. I also have this little electrical screwdriver. It can be useful for pulling the finer roots apart. Normally I have a set of dental tools to do it with because they have a lot of options and they're very versatile, but for some reason I can't find them since we moved, so that'll be for a later date. I also have a spray bottle with me, just because you want to keep spraying things as you go. You don't want them to dry out. And it's good to spray them a little before you start so that they're not, in a dry environment. Some other things that are important to do before you start is make sure your plants are well watered. Moister soil is more friable and more likely to just fall off the plants easily. When it's dry, it's brittle and it tends to snap, which can damage the roots. And the roots themselves become less pliable as the soil dries out. And at this stage, losing any amount of roots can be a pretty substantial setback to seedlings. Now, things like this are pretty durable. You don't have to worry too much. Some other things you really can't even do this with at all because any little bit of disturbance will end up killing them. So do be mindful, do your research before you decide to try to parse out seedlings to get a better yield. So let's just get into it. To start, like I said, you want to just make sure everything has a little bit of a mist on it. Make sure no one dries out. And then you just want to be careful as you take things out. Do as little damage as possible. Sometimes inverting it is the best option. So you can pry a little bit away. You can see a lot of the roots are concentrated at the bottom. Just being gentle. Some will just come most of the way out. And I learned that one of the better techniques is to bounce, because you end up causing the soil to fall away. And you can see the root on this little seedling is already immense. So then I'll put it on my little paper towel, give it a spritz, keep going. And you will end up damaging some. Losses are to be expected. Some plants are better able to tolerate a little disturbance. And little guys, like I don't know if you can see this one, and this one especially right here in the middle. This guy's really not worth trying to do. He's so far behind, and this process will probably be really stressful for him. Something like this and this one, you can parse them out, but they may not take to it as well as larger seedlings. But we'll try. See how many we end up with. And when they're tangled like this, you just want to be really careful. Pull them out individually, because you may not end up hurting the roots, but it's also not good to rip off the leaves or the entire top of the plant. And I probably will end up throwing out some of the weaker ones here. There might end up being more than 50 seedlings, and I really don't need that many. These trays have 6 cells, and 6 of them fit into a standard 10 by 20 flat. So I'll probably only make 6 trays of this, which would end up with 36 plants. I could put, 2 per cell if I have some extra, but then the plants will just crowd each other out and end up weaker, and they're just harder to separate later. So it's usually not worth it unless it's a fragile plant and you expect that not everyone will make it. Then having a second one in a cell works as a good backup. So like I said, this super teeny tiny little guy, I'm not going to keep him. He's not really going to make it, and I have more than I need. And so you can see, definitely lost some roots in the process, but most of these should be fine. It's kind of like a little bit of a root pruning, but you do want to minimize as much as possible. And these 2 guys, I'll set them aside in the towel, but I may not end up using them. Nope, and this one I just accidentally snapped, so I won't end up keeping him. Yeah, I'll just give them a little spritz and then fold it over. And this is good to do if you want to take a break between separating seedlings, or you need to walk away or grab something. They'll keep like this for a pretty good amount of time. I've left seedlings in this kind of shape for an hour, sometimes longer, when I used to work at an arboretum, and they would turn out fine. So don't worry too much about it, but you don't want to leave them all day. So now for the rest of them, I think I might do a little bit of a time lapse so we can get through it a little quicker. So since this last cell only has 1, I'm obviously going to leave it, and then I'll just plant 5 more back into that tray. If you didn't want to have to do this whole process, you could just sow 1 seed per cell, but sometimes if it's a species you're not familiar with, like this one I've never grown before, and you don't know how well they're going to come up, sometimes that can end up with you setting up 36 cells and ending up with 5 plants. So sometimes it's not practical, especially space-wise. So you do want to be mindful of that. If it's a very delicate species, it is better to sow either 1 per cell or expect to only end up with 1 per cell and just prick out the extra seedlings so that you don't end up disturbing any of the roots. I have a little collection of some of the smaller ones I decided not to keep. I have a lot more than I need, So it's really not worth trying to get these guys going unless you want to do a really big planting or, give extra away to friends, which is always a, good cause. I'm sure I'll still have plenty to give away even without these. And I'll end up composting them. They still go to use. So yeah, let's get to potting these guys up. So now we're ready to start potting them up. I like to use these kind of rubbery bins that are used for mixing concrete usually. They're good because you can really make a mess without making a mess. And I usually store my soil in it, and I use the bag that the soil came in to cover it when I'm not using it. So we'll start with this tray with our single salvia. And then you just kind of want to select the best seedlings you have, bigger, hardier, or maybe, just with more roots even is a good choice. A couple to pick out all the ones I'm going to use before I start a tray. 4. Do be careful, you can still certainly injure them at this point. Getting a little tangled. I'll come back to that one. Okay, 5. So I usually start by putting a little soil in the bottom of all the cells because when you're putting developed roots in, you don't actually want them sitting on the bottom against the plastic, ready to dry out at a moment's notice. So generally you want to hold them by the stem gently, and I just kind of sit the roots in and then gently pour loose soil around them. You want to avoid any big chunks or branches. Then I'll firm it up a little, and then you just backfill with a little more so that when you go to water it, it'll even out. And I'm just using Miracle Grow here, so there's already some fertilizer, more than enough for these seedlings to make it until their next transplant, either into bigger pots or right into the yard. We'll see how these go. I'd like to just put them right into the ground because another transplant of these would involve spacing them out even more, which takes up even more space in the house, which is in short supply, especially considering how many more groups of seeds I have to do. One way to slow them down and make them end up being nicer plants is to pinch them so that they'll be bushier, which for salvia I would do anyway. Clear out a little there. Just gently. If you have clumps, you just can break them up. It's still good soil. And you really want to firm them up. Firm the soil around them. Make sure they're not too floppy. Over time, they'll, develop stability as they grow more roots and the stems become more rigid. But sometimes if you leave them too floppy, when you're handling them or just moving the tray, that can sometimes be enough to cause a stem to break, a root to break, and you don't want that. And if you're going to be taking a while, it would be good to cover the seedlings you have on your paper towel again. Spray them, cover them, not expose them to too much. Since I'm in my basement where it's pretty cool, a little damp anyway, I'm not too worried about them drying out. Sometimes it's helpful to take off the seed leaves. It allows you to plant a little deeper. And at this stage in the plant development, that's not a big deal for most herbaceous perennials. As they get bigger, you don't really want to plant them any deeper than they were at their last transplant. It can cause some rot of the stem. Yeah, some of these are a little more floppy than others. That's kind of hard to avoid when growing seedlings. of herbaceous stuff, especially when they're crowded, because when they're crowded, they tend to bend, grow sideways, grow outward, grow lanky, which tends to make them a little more floppy. And then it's just good practice to mist as you go, even once they're planted. And then just set them in a tray and move on to the next one. I think I'll do the rest as a time lapse. Well, I ended up being wrong about having extra. I had one extra seedling, and that's the one that I accidentally snapped at the beginning of the video. So I think the one that only had a single plant in the cell with the label, I think it threw me off count-wise. So you can see I did end up planting some that are a little smaller than I normally would, and they may or may not make it, but no harm in trying other than, you know, the little bit of potting soil that's in with it. But yeah, let's get these back up by the grow lights and get them watered. So I brought the seeds back up, and I've let them settle in for a day under a humidity dome, just, you know, to give them an easy time. Transplanting damages roots, dries them out, and it's a quick way to kill them if you just leave them in a low humidity, warm winter room. So hopefully they'll do well. Let's take a look. So they're doing pretty well, actually. Of course, the bigger ones are all starting to reorient themselves towards the light. Some of the littlest ones, you know, they had already curved a little when they were overcrowded in the flat. So they're having a little bit of a tougher time. You know, some of the littlest ones might not make it. I'll keep that 1 6-pack under cover a little longer than the rest. I'll probably take this lid off in a couple days so they can start to get more acclimated to, you know, a tougher life that they'll have to experience once they get outdoors. And, you know, then they'll start getting fungal problems under cover if I leave them too long, too moist. But that one little 6-pack I might, you know, stick in with these cold germinators just to keep it under cover a little longer for protection. But you can see transplanting out seedlings, you know, can make your seedlings go a lot farther. You know, I could plant a pretty big planting of these salvia once the time comes. You know, my husband's trying to open up a piano studio and he wants it to be cute over at that outbuilding, so a lot of them will probably end up over there. And they can probably go out, you know, beginning of May if we don't expect any frosts. Around here, Memorial Day is a good, like, absolute last day that you have to wait to put plants out. So they should go out around then. But we'll get some updates as we go along because they'll keep growing. And then with these big ones, you can see a lot of them have one good developed pair of true leaves, and they're starting to get a second pair. Once they get their third pair, I'll probably come through and pinch out the growing tips so that they'll grow bigger and bushier, which for some seeds is more important than others. For salvias like this, I would strongly recommend it. They tend to grow very tall and narrow if you don't pinch them. And even once they're in the ground, it can be good to cut off the tops of them after they've flowered or something, because they'll actually often flower a second time if you prevent them from setting seeds and leaving the old growth on. But that's pretty particular to salvias.
So yeah, this week I think I'm going to try doing some more, manual labor projects with my ankle. It's starting to feel pretty good. I think I can do some light duty outdoor yard work, maybe start on the bathroom in the house. So expect something along those lines next week. I'm going to try to be uploading on a regular schedule every Friday, hopefully. Maybe in the beginning it might end up being every other Friday, but you'll find out if you're along for the journey. Have a good one.